Hello, Year 6 coming into Year 7. My name is Miss Vanderveld and I am the lead teacher on thematic learning, which is unique to the Archer Academy. So this is a chance for you to explore this subject, which for many students is a real highlight of their week. And when you are Year 7, you'll have 4 lessons of this a week. So that's 4 hours a week of thematic learning. So let's start with what is thematic learning? Well, it is exactly what it says it is. It's learning thematically. So it means that you look at things in a cross-curricular approach, which means you look, rather than looking in the narrow confines of a subject, so my main subject is history, you actually look at a subject or a topic from lots and lots and lots of different perspectives. And you'll see that it's a very broad way of looking at it, and it's incredibly enriching, and you can really gain a lot of insight from it. So the best way to explain thematic learning is to give you an example. So one of the units we do in Year 7 is on Greece. So what I want you to do now is just think about that word Greece and write down 5 things you think, if you were having a topic on Greece, what would you expect to cover? So I'm going to go through a few of the lessons that you would cover. It's not exhaustive. We can change things as they come along. But I wonder if you thought of any of these aspects of Greece that could be explored, because it's all about being curious about the topic of Greece, and it can be really far-reaching. So, for example, did you come up with perhaps the geography of Greece, looking at the landscape and population of Greece? Looking at Greek culture, here looking at food, music, art, architecture, theatre, dance. We have a fantastic lesson. It's probably one of my favourites of the whole year, where students do experience all of those on a carousel. And if you ask a current Year 7, a lot of them will tell you about the food in particular. Did you think about language, ancient Greek? And actually, modern English has a lot of words that have ancient Greek roots, and that's one of the things that we explore. So we look at how our language, English, has actually developed thanks to ancient Greeks, or ancient Greek. Ancient Greek history, looking at the Greek Empire, so that's going back around 2,500 years, and seeing how this early civilization has influenced the modern world, perhaps in terms of architecture, perhaps, as I mentioned before, in terms of language, perhaps in terms of how we run the country. A concept like democracy comes from ancient Greek history. Mythology, looking at the huge array of Greek myths and the amazing gods and characters encountered within them. Some of you might have read the Rick Riordan series and be very familiar with various Greek myths. Others might have read Stephen Fry. He wrote a wonderful book called Mythos. And these are very much still in the public domain and a very important part of storytelling. And some of our stories still follow a structure that goes right back to ancient Greece. But what about modern Greece? Did you mention anything about modern Greece? Perhaps modern Greece as a holiday destination, or perhaps looking at current or relatively current political issues. One of the things we look at is the financial and migrant crises, which happened in the last 5-6 years. And so this would be a topic that you would study. And as you can see, it doesn't necessarily fall into the bucket of Greece, of geography, or of history, or of English, or of a modern foreign language. It encompasses much broader ideas. So let's give you a bit of a challenge now. I'm going to ask you to think thematically. What I want you to do is to look at all these hexagons and just choose any 2 and see if you can make a link between them. There is no right answer, and I am, every year when I show this to students, I'm always amazed by their creativity and the ideas they come up with. So have a good look at all these hexagons. Can you link perhaps Donald Trump to ballet shoes? Or Steve Jobs, that's the man with the iPhone. Can you link him to Queen Victoria? Or the mouse? Or Boudica, who's the statue above the mouse? Making links, that's thinking thematically, seeing if you can join things together. In a moment, I'm going to share some of the favourite ones that I've actually stolen from former students to share with you today. I wonder if anyone can think of something whereby the phantom toll booth links to other things on this rather random selection of images. And there's a number of ways you could do this. You could do it that it's all one long line, or you could do it that it's a shape that tessellates, that means it connects together. Or maybe you could even try and do it in this existing structure, which, as I said, is quite random. So how might dice link to Harry Potter, link to Trump? Everywhere where they're touching, is there a link? Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of ideas. Maybe you came up with some of these. One of my favourite was the cake and Queen Victoria. And one of my students a couple of years ago said, the cake is a Victoria sponge, Queen Victoria. Fantastic. The phantom toll booth and a globe. Again, one of my students previously said, well, the phantom toll booth starts with a map and a globe is effectively a map. Fantastic. What about Steve Jobs and that mouse? Now on this one, I have to say, you have to think quite laterally. And if I show you this, I don't know if you can see it, might give you a clue. So, see if I can go right in front of my camera. Here we go. So this is a computer mouse, which links to Steve Jobs, because of course he invented Apple computers and they were the first to take on the computer mouse. So there you go, you've got some links and connections. And it's that process of thinking that is absolutely critical to thematic learning. And through it, you can explore all sorts of different disciplines, from business studies to philosophy, to ancient literature, to storytelling, to creative art forms, all sorts of things. It's a very, very exciting subject to learn and a very exciting subject to teach. So we're going to have another go at thinking thematically. Study this photograph. Now this photograph would be looked at in a number of different subject areas. It could be looked at in geography, it could be looked at in art or photography, it could be looked at in history, it could be looked at from a science perspective. So what I want you to do is to just see if you can come up with maybe a minimum of 5 questions from a few different approaches that you might want to raise. So we're thinking about being curious, and how might your curiosity be piqued by this particular photo? Have a look at the people in the foreground, but also have a look at the background. Perhaps look at some of the very, very specific details. What questions do you have about it? So here you might ask very big questions. Why are some parts of the world more impoverished than others? Or you might have asked something more about the human connections. Are these people all from one family, or are they in fact from different families? What do they think of the world they live in? What's their perspective, you might ask? You might ask, from looking at the rubbish that lies behind them, if I show you with my mouse here, that actually what diseases or what problems might occur because of that amount of refuse. You might ask about who took the photo. If you were thinking from an artistic perspective, maybe someone have a think about that. What about the composition of the photograph? Rather unusual to have these people standing in this way. And I've seen students before who've been drawn to this dog. Does someone own that dog, or is that dog a wild dog? What's the perspective of the dog? This is the outside of one of the houses, a home. What does it look like from inside? What is it that makes these people have a quality of life that is different from others? And all sorts of questions about whether it's the responsibility of the world to look after everybody, or whether people have a responsibility in their own nation. So you can have the questions as big or as small. What's the kids' names? What's the dog's name? Does the dog have a name? So you really can go as far or as wide. And as I said, it's from a number of different perspectives. So if we were looking at it as a geographer, we might think about why some people in the world are incredibly wealthy and have everything and are massive consumers, and others are very impoverished. If you want to look from a history perspective, you might ask why it is that, and this photograph's from Africa, why it is that in particular certain African states are much, much worse off than others, and why is that the case? And you'll find that often it's about their past, and in particular their past in relation to Europe and European empires. Or you might ask a question as an artist: what is it that makes this picture so powerful? Or you might ask it from an ethical perspective. Is it okay for the photographer to take this picture? And maybe it's a photographer who himself has some food. Is it appropriate for him to therefore feed these children? So all sorts of different questions. So now I'm going to set you something that's a little bit more on your own, something to complete on your own. So you've had a little taste of thematic learning and you've seen that it's about being creative. It's certainly about being curious. You often have to be articulate, you have to express your ideas. Sometimes you work in small groups on something, sometimes you work individually. Sometimes it will be something that is very, very imaginative and creative, and other times things that require a little bit more thinking, logic and science. It really is very far-reaching. And I'm going to finish with, I think, probably a topic that we do cover in thematic learning, and a lot of students from the Archer would say this was their favourite, and that is a theme park topic. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about how you'd approach the idea of theme parks thematically. And what we do in thematic learning is we set students, usually in groups, but you can do this on your own as well, and you need to think about how you're going to create your own theme park. And I'm going to ask you to think about this from a number of different perspectives: a designer, a mathematician, a scientist, a geographer, a storyteller. It could be any of them. So what I would ask you to do, the best place to start, is to think of a theme. Now here, again, I'm going to draw on my experiences of other students, previous students. So some of the very successful ones have done a horror story theme. Others have done sweets, very creative, very colourful. Another one did something on rivers of the world, which was incredibly educational, but also very fun. And there was even one that did it on the Black Death, which was very, very bold. And when you're thinking about your theme and you've come up with an idea, you're really happy with it, yes, this is what I want to do, you're then going to have to think about it from different points of view. Let's start with the designer. What's going to be your logo? What's going to be the design of your key attraction? What is the layout of your theme park? Or maybe from a mathematical perspective, what are the costings of your theme park? How much will you charge for tickets? Adults, children, think about it. Maybe from a creative writing perspective, how will you advertise your theme park and make people want to visit? How good are you at persuasive writing? Or as a scientist, what is the science behind your roller coaster? What is it that makes a roller coaster fun? And what are the parameters? What is safe and what isn't safe? What actually works and doesn't work from a science perspective? Thinking about forces here, thinking about momentum, all these sorts of ideas. Or you might think about it as a geographer. A theme park needs to be based somewhere, so you're going to have to find a good location. Previous students have looked at, for example, the railway map of Britain, and they've also looked at the motorway map of Britain, and they've seen if they can find somewhere that's really accessible. Because you might have a lovely piece of land that's in the middle of the most beautiful countryside, but if no one can get there, if there aren't good motorways going up there or good train networks, it's not going to work. So a location is actually really critical. And some people even looked into how wet or dry or sunny those places were. And people avoided certain places because they actually were notoriously very wet, and that's not great for a theme park. So you'd be amazed where this might take you. And then there's a business studies angle. Who is your target audience? Is it teenagers, or is it very young kids, or is it whole families? What is your unique perspective? How are you different from existing theme parks like Thorpe Park or Harry Potter World? How are you different? Where are you going to find a place in the marketplace? And then we ask a question about investors, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And then you think about, well, what about extra merchandise? Could you have some ideas for t-shirts or perhaps for key rings or something much more creative and unusual that ties in with your theme? It's all got to go back to your theme. Now, you might think of a few things that you can actually do here. What about creating a map of your theme park? or designing the logo of your theme park. Or perhaps, if you're feeling bold, design a roller coaster for your theme park. And really pay attention, look online and see if you can work out what it is that works and how they work. What's the function behind them? What about creating an advert for your theme park? This could be filmed, or this could be a poster, or it could be a whole plan for social media. Create a Dragon's Den pitch. Now, in year 7, we do actually invite in dragons. I don't mean fire-breathing dragons. Those of you who've seen Dragon's Den on BBC will know that these are people who work in business, and people come and pitch their ideas. Could you pitch your idea to one of these dragons? And every year we have one team out of the whole of year 7 who manage to convince the dragons, and they end up with a prize. So could you create a pitch? How would you convince someone to put their money behind your idea? You could create a model using things around the house. You can use toilet rolls, straws. I've seen all sorts of things used. So could you create a model of your theme park, or perhaps just of your roller coaster? Could you create merchandise for your theme park? And you can see here I've left a bullet point at the bottom and an empty space, because really you can take this anywhere you want. So we'd love you to get creative, to spend a bit of time, maybe away from the screen, and just have a good old think about what it is that you enjoy when you go to a theme park, but can you also do it from different perspectives, really thinking about all the different features that might be required. I hope you've enjoyed your first mini thematic learning lesson, and I look forward to welcoming you all in September.